So in reading Spoiling and Sustainability, Technology, Water, Insecurity, and Visibility in Arctic Alaska. First, I was thinking like, it's funny how people use words to manipulate a situation, right? So when I hear the word insecurity, a lot of times it's really like, it's not real, it's in your head, right? I'm insecure about my tummy, everybody's looking. So when somebody hears food insecurity, I think words have a meaning, and that always bothers me when I hear insecurity. Because if you think of a food insecurity, it's like somebody who chooses to be bulimic because they're insecure about what food does to their body. And so I feel like when you use certain words like spoiling and insecurity, this insecurity puts the blame on like the person instead of the system that created the problem, is how I feel. And then with the spoiling, it's like when you think of spoiling in the United States, it's like I spoil my girl, I give her everything, or I spoil my kids because I want them to understand nice things. And so when you hear it, I was looking on so here are the notes. I did take notes, but as we both know, I speak better than I write. So these are the notes. I took nice notes. And I wrote on page 487, it says, so if life is easy now because of their word for white people, why are there's still problems? So that cracked me up. That's like, to me, your man punching you in the face and then buying you jewelry and buying your house and paying the bills. And it's like, I take care of you. So what? I punched you. What's the problem? What's the problem? And because no one wants to work, where she's talking about, there's an older lady where it's talking about spoiled by technology. So we go in, Russia went in, and everybody else who went in and stole their land and their resources, the oil, the ice, the fish, the sea creatures, as my nephew likes to call them, right? And then we sell all these things, and then we come back and give you like a small percentage of everything we earned, so you could barely make it and stay alive. So we could say, I don't understand why you're complaining. You're being spoiled, but none of y'all want to work, right? So I don't like that, because in here I was like, they're getting spoiled and supported and being given things because from profits that these other countries are getting from their resources. So we steal your resources and then give you $5, and we're trying to understand like, what's the problem? Total gaslighting in my brain. And it talks about an elder lady where it's like, without government support, elders would have to live with their children. Now we have our own houses. That does several things to me, because even though we're individualized and we get money and I live well, it's not a bad thing when you have family that lives together. In a lot of cultures, that's like natural. So it cracks me up and also generational different patterns, right? So if you're a person who grew up in this system that they're talking about after all these things happen, you're like, well, they're taking care of us, so why are we complaining? But the younger ones are like, they're taking care of us because they owe us and we want our land back. So it's intriguing they talk to an older person, and we think they have more wisdom, and they do, but a lot of them had many more years of being institutionalized and not as educated and aware of the surroundings of the world and how things are moving as these younger kids do. So I'll use my parents for an example. My sister got a bonus, raise, $24,000 raise, right? And then she's like, you know what? If it comes down to certain things and I have to make a decision, I'll leave this job. They don't own me. And my dad was like, how could you leave the place paying you so much? And she's like, because my values are more important than this paycheck. I will survive. But if you've been in the situation where it was an issue, you're not likely to feel like you could survive, and you'll think they don't know what they're talking about. They didn't live through blah, 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 the abuse, right? And so another thing that got me was on page 482, when it talked about domination and village water insecurities, and it says, for those who still engage in subsistence livelihood, their social relations reproduce shared networking prestige for the poor and disabled, important in mitigating water insecurities and it talks about the water insecurities prior to colonialization were an issue. And that's true. Think of COVID. Certain things were already an issue. I feel like COVID exacerbated it. I think the same thing is with colonization. Every culture, every tribe, every group had issues, but then when you have an outsider coming in, they're going to exacerbate it or take advantage of it. And so, and the last part for this was the account hard to believe because we cover our tracks. This could just be me being skeptic, but on page 483, where it talks about, I feel it's important to get a narrative about a culture from somebody from the culture. Having been military, when they're like, oh, we showed up and everybody was dead. But just like recently when it was like, oh, we bombed the place and it was the bad guys. And then now they're being sued and paying money and reparations because it was regular families. So I have trouble believing that, which is funny. Maybe that's why I need to retire. But I think, and we talked about this in Dr. Sterrett's class with history, when it's written by the victor, history is written by the victor, so they're going to make themselves look great, right? So even if they did go in and do something, or they isolated them and they died from malnutrition, or whatever happened, whatever reason why, I find it hard to always believe a narrative written by any government, period, because everything ends up some way being like some type of propaganda or justification or narrative to clean up after themselves is what I actually wrote in here. And interventions, same page. In later decades, it became apparent that village ecological conditions were largely unsuitable for providing adequate sanitation services using modern technology for growing population. And in there, interventions to improve health and focus on behavioral and cultural change. And my notes were I feel like it was victim blaming to an extent, because going into a place and then judging what they do and identifying, oh, well, it's the way your culture is and your behaviors. So let's change who you are at your root and then we'll fix the problem. When that wasn't necessarily the problem, forcing changes without paying attention to the infrastructure. And then attempts to seal houses and avoid drafts resulted in poor ventilation, and having to search for wood now that they were set instead of being mobile in their culture caused issues with lack of availability for things like wood. And I put as public health and the things we've learned this year, great example of wasting public health resources, where you go in, and I read about this in, I want to say medical anthropology, applied anthropology, where we talked about the importance of going into a community and asking, what do you need? And then helping them do it so it can be sustainable, instead of coming in and make changes that are not sensitive or care about what your culture really was before we got here, and identifying like, well, we gave them what they need and they didn't use it. And so I have came in, made changes that are not equal to what their culture and their beliefs and practices were, is not equal to properly utilizing our resources to fully help them and make them self-sustainable, and can cause more harm than good. And that's what I got on this one here, which was the reading number 17.